What's up, everybody? This is going to be another opinion-based episode similar to the one from last night, where you can just kind of listen to it without necessarily worrying about what's showing up on the screen. So feel free to kind of just throw a headphone in your ear and enjoy listening to my inner thoughts about this whole situation with the Nintendo Switch 2, primarily in relation to those that are white knighting for Nintendo and seemingly pushing back, even though effectively what I and most people that are critical of Nintendo want is just a better quality product at a better price. Right, because ultimately that's what this all comes down to. All of this talk of negativity, grifters, haters. What I found very peculiar throughout this entire experience is that at least where I'm sitting, all I really want from Nintendo is to not rip us off, right? I've wanted them to treat us better when it comes to milking us, releases, drip feeding, bricking, banning, actual ownership, game key cards, hardware quality, legal rights, the simple ability to use their stuff in charity events, all that stuff wrapped together, and, with the added bonus of not suing other companies that are making games just because they're similar. And I find it very bizarre that this is something that I've been getting pushed back on for months now, because I don't think the average white knight for the Nintendo Switch 2 disagrees with any of my talking points. I think they would gladly enjoy and be in support of lower prices. I think they would welcome better consumer treatment from Nintendo with open arms. But it is peculiar to see how much they're against those things, and after so much time being involved in this conversation, I'm sort of starting to pinpoint what their reasoning is. And obviously, this is not going to apply to every single person out there. This is largely based off of the conversations that I've observed, the things that have been said to me, and the majority of the talking points that I've seen come up ever since the launch of the Switch 2. And to be clear, I'm not talking about other YouTube channels and what they've said. Influencers are gonna do whatever they have to do in order for their channel to succeed. I've given my case and my defenses as to why I'm not simply just churning out these videos for the sake of my channel's growth or monetary gain. And at the end of the day, it's up to you guys to do what you want with that information. But at the end of the day, because I'm a YouTuber and because I'm a content creator, I'm always going to be shrugged off by those that disagree with me, and likewise, the other content creators that are trying to unsuccessfully white knight for Nintendo, likewise, they're going to be shrugged off by the majority of the Nintendo fandom, because the majority of the Nintendo fandom is very upset with Nintendo's practices right now. So I'm mostly focusing on people that don't have anything to gain from this. Not money, not clout, nothing. It's just pure passion. You're online, you're arguing against a content creator, you're coming to my channel and you're arguing against me. You're going on to forums and posts online and you're arguing against somebody else or banning people or whatever it is. Those are the individuals that I've been most interested in understanding. So I'd say there are basically two comments that I have seen come up the most when it comes to all of this discussion, and they're very related to one another. Since the very beginning, I've frequently seen a similar comment repeated over and over again. The white knights of Nintendo, the corporate apologists, whatever you want to call them, are almost always indicating that they don't necessarily disagree with my point of view and they don't disagree with my thoughts. They just don't like that I explicitly go after Nintendo, right? In their minds, they think that the fact that I'm going after Nintendo is a clear sign that I'm only doing this for clout and fame and money, or whatever the reasoning is. And again, I don't care to defend myself right now. I've done that plenty of times already. But what I'm more interested in understanding is if they agree with the points I'm making towards the prices, the drip feeding, and all the other bullcrap that's coming from Nintendo, why are they so tied to the idea that Nintendo is being used here as the primary target of this backlash of the gaming community? Right, like, logic indicates here that if I decided to go rah-rah against Xbox or PlayStation and make the exact same types of videos and points and arguments, right, because what Nintendo's doing, let's be real, most of it overlaps with what the greater gaming community has done. So if my channel was called Xbox Dean or Sony Dean, and I was making the exact same videos with some tweaks here and there, seemingly they would be very much in support of what I'm doing and they would actually encourage me to do it more. By the looks of things, that's kind of what they're implying in their statement. They just don't want Nintendo to be the target here. I found this kind of odd, but it's a clear indication of blind fanboyism, tribalism, if you will, even. The idea is that they've committed their time and effort and passion and life and nostalgia towards this single company, and for them, for one reason or another, they don't want people to hate on it as much because they're so tied to it. This may be because they've invested a lot of time and money and passion towards it, and maybe they have a hard time coming to terms that they're supporting something that's so ugly, or it could have nothing to do with the monetary angle of things, and they're just very passionate about the company because of memories they had when they were a child, for example. There's a big sentiment and attachment to the company that's a little weird. Now, I am mostly leading towards that attachment in the weird side of things. I'm using weird because I don't know what word to use here. A very big part of the reason I say that is because I think all of us are a little weird when it comes to Nintendo, right? The reason I am so strong and adamant to fight back against Nintendo is because that's the company that I'm most passionate about. And likewise, my viewers have the same type of bond and connection to this company because of all the memories they have with it as well. Most of you, at least. So effectively, on both sides of this, you have very passionate Nintendo fans that are reacting in two extremely opposite ways towards this new generation for Nintendo. This price gouging post-Iwata and Reggie version of them. The issue is with this emotional attachment, if you cannot remove the logic behind your decisions and the way you view the company, what ends up happening is a lot of that bond that you had with Nintendo as you were growing up is no longer going to be applicable to the upcoming generations. Nintendo, by nature of being the budget brand, and really in general by being part of the gaming industry for as long as it has been a source for generations of people at this point, many of which could not afford to spend on more expensive luxuries in life. Through the affordability of Nintendo's gaming in comparison to the competition around it, bonds and friendships and attachments have been created for a few decades at this point. And to see such a drastic step from one generation to the next, going from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2, it almost feels like it's burning away that amazing legacy that set Nintendo up to what it is today. This is why so many people look at the current Nintendo model and they say that the company is soulless, because back in the day, we felt there was a soul and there was a passion that was put into the games that we played, and was also reflected to an extent in the way that the company treated their customers as gamers. They weren't perfect, don't get me wrong, but they were much better than what they are now. But those that are so blinded by the implications of the criticisms of Nintendo, I don't think they view it from that angle, and I think they look at the console in a much more selfish manner. And that kind of leads on to one of the other points that I've seen come up the most in most of my comments. Why is Nintendo getting so much hate and criticism for this, whereas Sony and Xbox and the rest of the gaming industry is not? And I think that question can be answered in two parts. First off, Xbox, more so than Sony, already got this over a decade ago. The Nintendo Switch 2 right now is not really that different to what the Xbox One was, and that's why there was such a big backlash that was aimed towards them. As a matter of fact, in a lot of ways, all of the anti-customer things that we're seeing from Sony and from Xbox right now, part of the reason I'm so concerned about the direction that Nintendo's taking with the Nintendo Switch 2 is that within a generation or two, what we're seeing over there and what most Nintendo fans are critical of from those companies, it seems clearly that Nintendo is going in that direction because they want to follow their successful business model. So naturally myself, as well as everybody else that's very critical of Nintendo with this Switch 2, we're pushing back against the new console because we've spent so many years not wanting Nintendo to just become Sony or become Xbox. There are pros and cons to every platform and different strokes for different folks and all that stuff, but there are certain vibes and cultural elements, we'll call them, for each one of the fan bases, and Nintendo always has had their own specific niches. The physical game copies is a big one of them. Once upon a time, it was very important that the entire game was released fully on the same cartridge without future DLC and all that stuff. Like, you could just get the game and enjoy it. You never had to worry about them increasing the price dramatically and being like, oh, the only thing you're getting here is a slight visual bump. These were all aspects of Nintendo consoles that have been very successful and very much enjoyed by the Nintendo masses. And obviously the list goes on and on and on. But the issue is when the Switch 2 White Knights are seeing all of these criticisms and they're being like, well, if Sony can get away with it, why is Nintendo getting all the flack for it? Again, this all comes down to a sense of attachment towards the console, towards the company, towards their memories and the love and passion they have for the games. They would love to stand up for things that they clearly believe are wrong or at least are not good for the gaming industry as a whole, but they don't want it to happen at the cost of the company that they love the most. I think we can all pretty much agree that Nintendo's not going to get bankrupt, right? I think most of us can pretty much agree that Nintendo has the capability to make very enjoyable games. And outside of a few hiccups here and there, they'll continue to release that kind of good quality. So I don't think we're in a position where we need to support Nintendo in order to make sure that they make better games. In fact, history has shown the opposite, that if you don't support Nintendo, you get a better output and a better quality product. And of course, most importantly, for a much better price. So it's not like the White Knights are supporting Nintendo's anti-customer practices because they're like, oh, if I don't do this, we might not get another good title from them. So it tells me that part of the reason they're ignoring all of this stuff and the reason they don't want it on Nintendo's neck is in part because they've been dealing with a fanboy tribal war for so many years now. Console warring has never really stopped. Actually, some of the most passionate Nintendo fans spent the better part of the last 5 years talking about how the PlayStation 5 cannot live up to the success of the PS4. Even until now, there are threads and discussions coming up about how the active PlayStation 4 user base is still so large and so strong because Sony is failing at incentivizing people to move on from the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 5. And these are the same people that believe that Sony intentionally did shortages during the pandemic and milked that launch with artificial scarcity for as long as they have. And they're the same people that were arguing about the shipped versus sold numbers for the PlayStation 5. And they're the same people that argued against all of the games not being on the discs, arguing against Sony starting to charge $10 for upgrading some of their games from the PS4 version to the PS5 version, etc. But the thing is, for them, Sony did all of these things that they don't like for the gaming industry, but it succeeded. And now in their minds, they're like, well, I guess if it worked for Sony, now it's Nintendo's turn to succeed. Because in their minds, as Nintendo fans, I think they deep down believe it's a reflection on their product being inferior if it can't succeed on the same level playing field with the PlayStation 5. So for example, if the PlayStation 5 and the Nintendo Switch 2 are the same price and they're all doing the same anti-consumer crap that we're seeing in the gaming industry, in their minds, Nintendo not being able to get away with it implies that PlayStation is a better console, which they would never be able to admit. And they wouldn't be able to sleep at night if they had to say that out loud. Now, to make something very clear, I don't think the PlayStation 5 is a better console than the Nintendo Switch 2. I actually think comparing them is kind of stupid. But what I do know for certain is when something is stronger and it's a more advanced piece of hardware, it's worth more money than the product that is inferior. Without a doubt, I say a PlayStation 5 should cost more than a Nintendo Switch 2. But that doesn't mean that I think the PlayStation 5 is a better console than the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, in saying that, I don't own neither a PlayStation 5 or a Nintendo Switch 2, so I'm kind of being a little bit hypothetical here. But I owned an Xbox Series X while I owned a Nintendo Switch. I own them both right now, still. I say this without a shadow of a doubt. The Nintendo Switch is a better console than the Xbox Series X based off of my own subjective opinion. But if you told me to buy that Nintendo Switch that I bought for $500 instead of the $300, I would have laughed you off. As a matter of fact, if that Switch came out for $350 or $400, I would have laughed you off. But an Xbox Series X, giving the hardware and the tech behind it, absolutely, it's worth the $500 that I spent. And I would be ridiculous if I assumed that the Switch and the Xbox should be the same value. Now, the Series X is newer than the Switch, whereas the PS5 is older than the Switch 2, but the same discussion could be had if I was comparing the PlayStation 4 with the Switch 1, for example. It's outdated tech versus new tech. I like the Nintendo stuff more because the quality and the types of games, I prefer those always. But objectively, the tech behind it should not be more expensive than what's more advanced just because Mario makes a cool noise that makes me happy when he jumps. And to me, it's very clear that the Nintendo White Knights have a hard time grasping this. Because in their minds, they believe the quality put behind Nintendo games is so superior that it is worth spending more money on these things. And the issue is now you're using subjectivity to justify anti-customer practices. I agree with it. I agree with the concept that Nintendo games are the best quality. I love Nintendo titles. I've always have. That's all I'm still playing, even right now during my boycott. But I don't love them enough to celebrate when Nintendo charges a higher price so I can say, like, look how good this game is. People are willing to spend $80 on it. Or even $7 for something like Kirby Air Riders and Mario Tennis Aces. The idea here is I'm willing to put my own passions and my love for Nintendo games aside because I think it's more valuable and more important to us as a gaming industry to stand against high prices and other anti-customer practices. I don't need my Nintendo purchases validated because this console is more successful than that one, or to pat myself on the back because the price of the game that I bought and enjoyed so much and Nintendo made more money on was a lower budget game with higher profits than the immensely massive multi-billion-dollar game that PlayStation released and fewer people bought. Right, that's what the console warring effectively comes down to. The Switch 2 White Knights don't want to see Nintendo fail because in their minds, they still have this, I guess it's an inferiority complex, or maybe it's a superiority complex because the Switch 1 did better. This idea that their console that they're so tied to will beat out Sony because it's better, subjectively. But here's the thing, I'm still a fanboy at the end of the day, and I still 100% am a much bigger fan of Nintendo games and PlayStation games. But I'll tell you what, when the PlayStation 5 came out, and people were spending an arm and a leg to get a hold of that console, not only the $500, but the fact that they were willing to spend double on that console, I actually kind of laughed at that. I thought it was absolutely so ridiculous that they would go out of their way to spend that much money on a PlayStation 5 just so they can have something nicer to play Call of Duty and Fortnite and Madden on. It felt very much like mindless spending. And I should caveat this by saying, number one, if that's all you enjoy on your console, I'm happy for you. If you just bought a PlayStation 5 just so you can play those games on a higher resolution, that's good. Like, I'm glad people are spending money on what they're happy on. Even with the Switch 2, I've always said it. If you enjoy it, I'm happy for you. And likewise, I realize that there are a lot of PlayStation fans that have a more sophisticated taste, should we say, with their console. But speaking specifically about how I felt a few years ago, that's definitely what I saw. I saw blind consumers and people that were just going out there, dropping $500, up to $1,000 even to scalpers, grabbing a console and playing the exact same games they were playing on their PlayStation 4 on this new PlayStation 5. And I just felt like it was like dumb, for lack of a better term. And for me, there's actually a sense of pride in the backlash against Nintendo going into the Switch 2. Or at least I thought there was a sense of pride, but it's kind of up in the air right now with this whole civil war going on with the Nintendo fandom, where you got the white knights who are like, Nintendo can do no wrong, we gotta give them as much money as possible, even if they're treating us like crap. Whereas the rest of us are like, yo, we want to enjoy these games, we just don't want to get ripped off, amongst other anti-consumer BS. But going into the launch, and now seeing that the Switch 2 might be having some hiccups, especially in the holiday season, I took it more as a sign of a faith in the Nintendo fandom. I'm glad there is a huge backlash. I'm glad there are so many people that are like, yo, like, Nintendo should not be doing this. This never would have happened with the Reggie Iwata era. Because back then, we were enjoying the Nintendo stuff because it wasn't being exactly like PlayStation. It was different. Sure, there were some sacrifices you had to make. Nintendo's online sucked, but it still sucks. The quality of the hardware wasn't there, but it's still not there. The stuff that has changed is the over-obsession with DLC and upgrade packs and extra money paid here and there. A huge jump in the price of the console to make it match the PlayStation, which we know is objectively a stronger system. All the while, releasing significantly fewer games all throughout, even though the budgets are smaller. This is going to sound very fanboyish, but I always thought Nintendo fans, even though people look at us and think that we're dumb Disney adults, to an extent, I think those of us that are standing against Nintendo and the overwhelming push against Nintendo since the announcement of the Switch 2 is proof otherwise. We don't just accept anything. Or rather, I should say, most of us in this online gaming space will not accept anything. We have high expectations of what Nintendo is bringing to the table, and promising a frame bump and resolution bump and trying to release the exact same games over again and trying to take away our ownership and trying to limit what's physical and what's digital and releasing games incomplete to us and stretching out the release between games just so you can maximize how many sales each title can get and trying to enjoy the most important tool that Nintendo has always had. They always had the best ace up its sleeve in the affordability aspect of it. These are all things that do not meet our expectations from what we accept from the corporation that we're investing our money into for our own pleasure and leisure. So I actually have a major sense of pride that there is such a massive backlash against Nintendo for all of these things. And there's something that I genuinely agree with the Switch 2 White Knights on, is that Sony, Xbox, and all the other big corporations around the gaming industry should not have gotten away with all of this stuff. But I'm glad that there's a line being drawn at least where we stand. And don't get me wrong, it might amount to nothing, but there's a change regardless of how you want to look at it. They call us a vocal minority, right? I don't think the hardcore Switch 2 fandom has all bought into the Switch 2 and supports Nintendo right now because there aren't enough sales out there yet that would imply that Nintendo was able to capture their entirety of their hardcore audience. But even if hypothetically speaking, we are just a vocal minority, at the end of the day, we are vocal. And we're the ones getting the views, and we're the ones getting the clicks. We are the ones leading the discussions online. When people search Nintendo, they find negativity. They find pushbacks, they find backlashes, they find boycotts. So whether people want to admit it or not, we have an effect on this. We have an effect on the person Googling if they should buy a Nintendo Switch 2. I'm not going to say that this online discourse in its entirety is the reason that the Switch 2 just had such a terrible holiday season, because I think Nintendo naturally did that to themselves by pricing so many people out of it. But it is absolutely not a coincidence that Nintendo having such a terrible holiday season in its launch year happened during a time where there was such a massive push against them. And even if that was only like 5 or 6% because of us, for me, that's still good enough. I take pride in that. Not only in myself, but I take pride in the entirety of the Nintendo community that has stood up and pushed back against Nintendo. And I hope we continue to do so. There is zero chance Nintendo is not pivoting somehow to make a better product now to make it more appealing to people. There is zero chance they're not trying to figure out how to get through all of this after the terrible holiday sales and the horrible PR online. We may never find out what it is they're doing to get around all this, but the reality is they're going to find a way to make their console more appealing, and it's going to be because of us to an extent. And I am 100% okay with that, even if I never find out what their change is. Because for me, as far as I know, the Switch 2 has been on discount on a worldwide scale through its major holiday and still suffered to move units off of its shelves. The Nintendo fandom was already able to accomplish that. And with how hard it is to even just slightly move a corporation an inch, I think that's already a massive achievement. And I genuinely hope we can continue to push and get something much more tangible out of this. But even if we don't, it will always be worth it to stand up against a corporation. But hey, you guys already know that. I think I've made that very clear. That is all I have for tonight. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.